Anyway, she is a member of our society, and she's been doing research, genealogy research for over 2 decades. Anybody been doing it longer besides Richard? Okay. She has a master's degree in library and informational science, and a master's degree in English. That's pretty awesome, girl. That's pretty awesome. She moved to Bloomington in February, not Bloomington. That's where I'm from. Okay, Bloomington, Indiana. Okay. I lived there 40 years, so it's been stuck. Okay. She moved to Byrdstown, you know Byrdstown, in February of this year. And to learn more about her Zachary heritage. There might be a book down the way someday. And since then, she has traveled to over 15 counties in Kentucky and Tennessee pursuing this and scouring out all the knowledge of the local libraries, archives, courthouses, and historical societies. So Paul, you've been right there with her, haven't you?
For a lot of it.
So tonight she's going to tell us how she's kind of pieced together a lot of this information about her family and third generation grandparents who lived here or who lived during the Civil War. So we're very happy to have her tonight, and let's give her a big clap.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Everett, can you hear me all right? Yep, okay. So this is the story of one family's experience during the Civil War, which in this area may be representative of more families, but to me it's very interesting because it's my own. But due to time constraints, I'm just going to limit the scope to the immediate members of James, Alan, and Cassandra Brock and their immediate family members. And I'm going to talk mostly about the period of the Civil War. This certainly is not the whole story. In an hour, I don't have time to tell you everything. It's just a fraction, so I'm going to hit the highlights. And the story of the Zacharys, as you guys already probably know, is so intertwined with that of Champ Ferguson, and there is a ton of material about Champ Ferguson, but I'm going to try to keep the focus on the Zacharys. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that I'm talking about real people. I tried to put this visual aid together to get an idea of what the family might have looked like in 1861. I don't have real photos of them, so I just found kind of stand-ins that I thought might look about the same age and whether or not they're soldiers or not, just to kind of give you a visual idea of what the family looked like around the time of 1861. They are real people. They lived here in Byrdstown, and we're all products of our time and place. And as we look back on the events of 160 years ago, it's impossible to know everything and fully understand the context of what happened. So we can't judge their actions by the standards of our own time. And I honestly believe that people do the best they can with the tools they've got at the time. And in this time, they're living in extraordinarily difficult times, making unfathomable decisions. And just like us, we're all mixtures of good and evil, and we are not the worst things that we've done. And indeed, I am certainly indebted to my great-great-grandfather, because without him, I wouldn't be here. And spoiler alert, he's pretty much the only one in his family to survive at this time. So I just kind of wanted to provide that to keep track of who's who and give you an idea of how they're related to each other. And I'll be happy to answer any questions or field comments at the end of my talk, because you guys have been here forever, so I'm sure there's stuff that you know that I don't, and I really do hope that you learned something here that you don't know already. But first, a little bit of background. So James Zachary, who was born in 1782 in Virginia, he was the first Zachary to come to this area around the turn of the 19th century. And when he became a teenager, he migrated from the Richmond area to Tennessee with a couple of his brothers and several of the Huddleston clan. So James married his first wife, Sarah Haley, around 1802, and they made it to Granger County, where that little red dot is. So they made it over there. They stayed there about 10 years, had a few kids, which included Zachary. Unfortunately, Sarah died, and then James quickly gets remarried, and then he and his wife and a few more Huddlestons end up moving to this area in the Overton County, Fentress County area, because Pickett County didn't exist at the time. So sometime between 1810 and 1813, they left a couple of James's brothers behind in Granger County, and they get here, and they have 4 more kids. James Allen was the oldest. He was born in 1813. He was my 3rd great-grandfather. They lived on what is now Billy Zachary Road. They had a farm, a really big farm there. And 20 years later, James, he gets married to Cassandra Brock about 1835 in what's known as Hale's Mill. They had 3 more children, and those 3 kids all married Huddlestons. So the Zachary clan is very much intertwined with the Huddlestons. Jane marries Thomas Huddleston. Easter marries Philip Huddleston. He has a brother named Elam, we'll be talking about later. And Peter Allen, he marries Kizzy Huddleston. And Cassandra's father dies in about 1841, and they move into their house, which is about 1.5 miles north of the bridge on 111. They had 12 kids that lived to maturity, and Cassandra's family is around. She's got a sister a couple miles north. Her name is Lucinda. She marries a guy named Pearson Hildreth, and they'll pop up later. Lucinda and Pearson live a few miles north. So James Allen, he becomes a local constable or magistrate. He becomes known as Squire Zachary. He can perform some limited administrative functions. He administers oaths, he issues warrants, and performs some marriages. So the Zacharys become part of the social fabric of Fentress County. And like any other family, they form friendships and alliances with some, and there's also some periodic conflicts. And they have a lot of conflict coming up with a guy named Champ Ferguson, who lives about 3.5 miles north of them over the state line in Kentucky around Spring Creek. You guys probably already know about Champ Ferguson. He was a prosperous landowner in Clinton County. He owned a few slaves, and he was a big guy. He was about 6 foot tall and 180 pounds, which is pretty big in 1850s, 1860s. He likes fine horses, he likes his whiskey, he likes to gamble and get rowdy. So he and his younger brother, Jim, were both quite known as capable fighters. And in 1858, Squire Zachary participates in one of the most fateful arrests of his life at the Lick Creek camp meeting, which I'm sure you guys have heard about. So to make a very, very long and very well documented story short, Champ had sold some livestock to some brothers named Alexander and Floyd Evans, who Judy's descended from, but they skipped out. They didn't pay him. So Champ obtains a legal judgment against them, but they're still not going to pay up. So he starts attaching their livestock, which means he goes in, he raids their livestock, he takes it, has it sold to auction, and that money is recouped towards the cost that's owed to him. So they go back and forth. The Evans brothers get tired of it. They file a judgment against him, and all this stuff is just building to a head. Oh yeah, here's a map. I'm sorry. So yeah, the Zacharys live here around 111. Champ is up there. Hale's Mill is down here. And in 1858, they have a camp meeting over in around Chanute. And these camp meetings are huge. They're one of the largest social events of the year, and everyone in this area descends upon the meeting for about a week. During the day, they have revival meetings, and at night, after the sun goes down, things start to get a little rowdy. They maybe do a little bit of drinking, a little bit of gambling, a little bit of fighting. So Alex and Floyd at this meeting, they spot Champ, and they alert one of the Fentress County constables, who's also their cousin, Jim Reed. and they decide that they're gonna arrest him for larceny, and a mob forms and starts throwing rocks at Champ. And Champ decides, I'm gonna go home, take off, go back to Kentucky. But the mob chases after him. Floyd Evans catches up with him first, and Ferguson stabs him repeatedly with his pocket knife and almost kills him. Next, Constable Jim Reed catches up with Champ, and Champ goes into a frenzy, stabbing Reed, and ultimately does kill the lawman. Elam Huddleston is the next to go after Champ, but probably takes a look at this bloody mess and decides the better of it, and he kind of peels off. And then at this point, Champ makes a break for it. He escapes the mob on horseback, but unfortunately his horse stumbles and falls. Champ takes off, gets into a house, goes upstairs in the attic, and pretty much double dog dares anybody to come up after him, and no one's gonna do it. So eventually the Fentress County Sheriff shows up and talks him down, promises him a fair trial. They arrest him and take him to Jamestown, and they're gonna press charges against him. And Squire James is one of the men who participates in this arrest. However, Champ spends a few months in jail, but he gets out with the help of a lawyer and posts $3,000 bond, and his trial is scheduled in January of 1859. And at this time, everybody has the feeling that war is coming, and Tennessee has been talking about seceding for some time. And Champ's lawyer knows that the political situation's gonna change. So he files continuance after continuance after continuance, up to 9 continuances, just running down the clock until Tennessee secedes from the Union. So they perpetually push back this trial. Champ never appears to face murder charges, and by mid-1861, after Tennessee secedes from the Unions, courts aren't meeting anymore. So the state of Tennessee drops the charges against him if he enlists in the Confederate Army. So Champ has effectively run out the clock and never faces any charges for murder for killing a lawman, shockingly enough. But Champ takes an extra step. This isn't good enough for him. At some point, he shows up to the Fentress County's registrar's place and demands to see the court's minute book. They bring out the minute book with the 6 pages of charges against him, and he takes his knife and cuts him out. You can still see it in the Fentress County archives over there. But however, if you go to the back of the book, it's still in the index, the state of Tennessee versus Champ Ferguson. And this is the only remaining record of the indictment against him for the murder of Constable Jim Reed. So at this time, at some point, Squire's father, in the fall of 1858, he had died. And meanwhile, while all of this lawsuit stuff is going on, the United States slides into war. In November of 1860, Lincoln's elected. 11 southern states secede from the Union, those in orange. These are the first to go. In April, the Confederates fired upon Fort Sumter, and this starts the war in earnest. In response to this attack, Lincoln makes a call for troops, forcing the issue. People are gonna have to decide which side that they're on. After the first 7 states secede, Tennessee is going to vote on whether or not they will follow in June of 1861. And as the vote nears, advocates on both sides are making fiery public speeches, they're having demonstrations, and they're cajoling each other for support. In Overton County, there are a few strong Union supporters, but they're overwhelmingly outnumbered. One judge in Livingston said all who were not for the Southern cause were against it, and that the Union men would all have to be hung, so they might as well begin the good work at once. This is Judge. No one is neutral, and the Zacharys certainly weren't. They are uncompromising Union people, said their son, and they had no use for secession or slavery, and they were not afraid to let their sentiments be known. And the Zacharys were not alone. Fentress County was the only county in the Upper Cumberland region of Tennessee to vote to stay in the Union. So during the war, when someone declared a side, they typically cut ties with anyone supporting the other faction, and they declared them as mortal enemies. And people are also holding each other responsible for the actions of their family members. For example, a local teacher in Livingston, her father cast the only vote for Union support in Overton County, and in retributions, families withdrew their children from her school. At this time, churches are disbanding, kids are staying home, courts stop meeting, civil life just falls apart. But however, everybody in the family didn't always support the same side. For example, Champ himself was the eldest son in his family, and he was the only Confederate sympathizer. They were strong Union supporters, and indeed Champ and his younger brother Jim had each vowed to kill each other on sight. And shortly after Tennessee secedes in June of 1861, the members of the Huddleston family, the Zachary family, the Beach family, probably Rufus Dowdy, they start going to Hale's mill and meeting and planning what they're going to do for the upcoming war. So in this environment, Fentress County is just kind of an island of Union support, and they're completely surrounded. So after Tennessee secedes, a lot of the families in Fentress County decide that they're going to move across the state line to Kentucky, which is still in the Union. Although it's a slave state, it's officially neutral. However, their governor, Beriah McGuffin, had strong sympathies. When Lincoln called for troops, he said no. He said, "I will not send a man nor a dollar for the wicked purpose of subduing my sister southern states." So that's the environment when the war breaks out and the war starts. And we're 5 miles from the border. So Elam Huddleston, he is the brother-in-law of Easter Zachary. His brother is Philip Huddleston. She's a daughter of James. He decides that he's going to move his family across the line in Clinton County. But he's got a third cousin named Stokely Huddleston. And Stokely had served as a sergeant in the Mexican War. And he's in his early 40s, and from what I have read, he was quite a firebrand, and he was very known for being strong-minded and a little belligerent. He had already been quarreling with his cousin Elam and the Zacharys for a few years. There had been some bad blood and slanderous activity from him. So earlier in June, Tennessee's governor had commissioned Stokely as a colonel to raise a regiment in Overton County. And while Elam's moving his family to Kentucky, Stokely seizes his property and locks up his house, preventing Elam from moving. So all the remaining possessions are inside, and he threatens to arrest Elam if he returns to Fentress County. Elam says, "I want my stuff." He comes back and he brings his friends. He brings Champ's brother, Jim Ferguson. He brings some Zacharys and other Huddlestons to reclaim his property. And they break the lock off on the house. They load up all the furniture and their other possessions. They put them in wagons and they take off from Kentucky. And as they do this, Stokely catches wind of it, and he says, "I'm going to get him." So he quickly assembles some of his recruits to intervene. And as Elam's group is coming up Skyline Lane around where the old Byrdstown Elementary Schoolhouse was, Stokely's starting to catch up with them. And Elam says, "That's enough, I'm going to take a stand." So they send the wagons with the possessions ahead, while some of them stay back to prepare for an encounter with Stokely. And so Stokely catches up and he commands them all to surrender, and they say, "No way. We're never going to surrender, but you're not going to arrest us. Don't come any further, or violence will certainly ensue." Stokely totally ignores the threat, and he races ahead of his men on his horse, and he's brandishing a sword. From behind the tree, the staked out is my second great-grandfather, James Marion Zachary. James Marion fires a shot from his rifle, and he kills Stokely instantly. when all of Stokely's guys see his commander get shot, they immediately flee and take off, and Elam's group makes it to Kentucky safely. So at this point, Stokely Huddleston is the first casualty of the Civil War in Tennessee, and the social fabric that's holding this area together has just started to rip. So this sends shockwaves throughout the community in the area. Blood has now been shed. The Civil War has come to Fentress County. And a week later, over at Hale's Mill, they, even though Tennessee had decided to secede, Fentress County had not. So they're gonna make a big deal for the 4th of July. Jonathan Hale was an outspoken Union supporter. He had moved here from New Hampshire. He erected a grist mill and a sawmill on the Wolf River, on what was known as the Old Huddleston Place. If you go across the bridge, just immediately to the left, if you're going north, there's a little historical marker where you can see where Hale's Mill used to be on the river. And it was kind of a one-stop shop. They had a lot of stuff there. Hale served as a postmaster, he was a mechanic, he also sold farmer's tools. He served as a Union scout during the war, and he provided lots of information to the Union Army. And after the war, he published a lot of pamphlets, inflammatory pamphlets about Champ Ferguson and the activities around here. So early on the 4th of July, 1861, there's a huge to-do. About 1,000 people descend on Hale's Mill, members of Union supporting families, and they bring their picnic baskets to celebrate the holiday. They raise the flag, they fire off 34 guns, they sing the Star-Spangled Banner. Hale's wife reads the Declaration of Independence. And this demonstration infuriates the Confederate sympathizers and makes Hale a huge target. So, the Zacharys have heeded the call to war. Tennessee is seceded, but the Zacharys aren't moving. They're staying put. However, they're gonna send their eligible men to go enlist across the state line into Kentucky. Leaders are calling for volunteers to form military regiments, and those who do remain behind start forming their own organized groups of home guards. Squire Zachary had an abdominal hernia, so he was ineligible for serving. However, 3 of his sons, Alan, James Marion, and Mitchell or Michael, sign up. Somehow earlier in that year, back in May, the eldest son, George Ambrose Zachary, had died. I think he was about 24, and I don't have any information as to why. I think he was living in near Jamestown in Russell County, Kentucky. He had a wife named Elizabeth. I think she was a peach, and they had a 2-year-old son named James, because we all need another James Zachary. So many of their cousins, such as Elam Huddleston, Jim Ferguson, Elza Smith also join them. Their uncle Philip Huddleston enlists later in November, and even 15-year-old William Logan comes in. They also have a friend who lives down the way. His name's Rufus Dowdy, who eventually becomes a captain in the First Kentucky Cavalry. And at this time, the Union Army is just forming. They don't have supplies, they don't have a lot of money, they're not well organized, so all of these young men are bringing their own horses and their own equipment. So when Peter Allen, James Marion, and Mitchell, and William Logan take off, they're taking about half their personal wealth. George Ambrose has died at this time, and James has died at this time. So the Zacharys are committed, is my point. They're taking their possessions, and they're traveling 100 miles north to Camp Dick Robinson, where a military training camp has been established. And this is definitely seen as a violation of Kentucky's neutrality. Governor McGuffin is not amused, as the recruits arrive around August 7th, and all of these men who have never traveled very far from their home, once you congregate a lot of people in a lot close proximity, you get a disease outbreak. And there was a big measles outbreak, which, if you know Champ Ferguson viewed that as, if you had the measles, Champ Ferguson thought that you had been to Camp Dick Robinson. Squire Zachary went to go visit them when they had the measles outbreak. And the recruits start training once they recover from the measles, and they take an oath to serve 3 years in the end of October, and they serve in Company C of the First Kentucky Cavalry under Colonel Frank Wolford, who was a very interesting character. If you don't know anything about him, I recommend. He's an interesting guy. And at this point, we've got the troops, they're starting to assemble and the war begins in earnest. At the end of September, military action officially begins in Tennessee with the affair at Travisville, and the Confederates start an offensive into Kentucky. They encounter Union resistance in October at this minor battle called the Battle of Camp Wildcat, where the newly formed Kentucky First Cavalry are part of this victory. And this is a welcome turn of events for the Union, especially after their humiliating defeat at the Battle of Bull Run. So after this battle, everyone in the Union is happy, and the cavalry gets a little time for recuperation. The soldiers get a leave of absence to visit home. The men of Company C are returning towards this area, but they didn't get that much respite, because on their way home, they hear that Ferguson's in the area, so they decide that they're gonna take after him. They try to sneak up on his house, but Champ already knew that they were coming, and a gunfight ensued, scatters Champ's men. Federals did take possession of the house, but were unable to find him. They got 17 horses and some weapons, and unfortunately, during this time, little 15-year-old William Logan gets shot, and he gets shot in the hip, receiving a flesh wound. But he recovers. So they have some minor scuffles in the area, and then at the turn of the year in January of 1862, we have our first major battle in the Western Theater of War, which is different from the Eastern Theater, where was more battlefields. Western Theater at this time is a lot of guerrilla warfare. The Confederates have continued their offensive into Kentucky, pushing westward. General Zollicoffer advances his troops, and he's around Somerset. He sets up his winter quarters 10 miles west of Somerset at Mill Springs, which is just north of the Cumberland River. The Union was ordered to drive him and the Confederates back across the river and break up their army. The Confederates led a spirited attack, but confusion reigned. The dark woods were filled with gun smoke, and recent rains had made the area exceedingly muddy. Ultimately, this battle goes to the Federals, and the Confederate line was broken, thus ending their campaign. This is the first significant Union victory of the war, and it was very celebrated in the popular press because they really needed some good news. However, it did come at a dear cost to the Zachary family, because during the battle, a shell hit the top of a beech tree, and when it landed, it bounced twice, and then it ended up hitting Mitchell Porter Zachary, or Michael, and it killed him instantly, and he is buried up at the battlefield in Mill Springs. So he is the first to die in battle during the war. So, meanwhile, here at home, with the vast majority of able-bodied men, they've enlisted in the army. There's not that many to manage the farms. The outbreak of hostilities seriously disrupted civil life in the county. Once again, churches aren't meeting, there's no school, virtually all civic functions have ceased. Loyal citizens could not expect any help from their government. I read that young couples who were still here, if they encountered someone like Squire James who could marry them, if he was just at Hale's Mill or walking down the street, they would ambush him and say, marry us right now. And then they would just get married like right there on the spot. Because it was so hard to get anything done, because civil life is just stopped. Union commanders had made a tactical decision not to venture south of the Cumberland River. Jonathan Hale protested that Clinton County, now that he's up in Clinton County, He said, I think they had 700 men who were eligible to vote at the time. 500 of them had gone to join the military. So there's only 200 men of voting age left in Clinton County. 70% of the men are completely gone. So there's not enough people to defend their home. And the Union responds, you're on your own. We might be able to send some occasional sweeps, but don't count on it. The cavalry that they had formed was literally not coming back. So in this vacuum, things have completely gotten out of control in the Upper Cumberlands. Confederates are sweeping into the county and into Kentucky. They're stealing horses and supplies. They're harassing Union supporters. They're burning houses down. And Federals are doing the same thing to Confederates. Tinker Dave Beatty was a notoriously savage bushwhacker, and he's killing people just as much as Champ Ferguson is. So in mid-March 1862, we're 4 months into the war, things are unraveling, and representatives from several counties decide to meet in Monroe down in Overton County to try to reach an agreement to rein in the chaos. Tinker Dave Beatty and his sons, they represent Overton County. Squire James comes from Fentress. Elijah Coger and Thomas Wood come from Clinton County, Kentucky, and they sit down with Champ Ferguson, Winburn Goodpasture, and some other people who are representing the Confederate side. And they hammer the agreement out. They say, okay, we're not gonna raid each other, we're not gonna cross into each other's counties, we're not burning any houses down, we're not stealing any horses, we're just gonna try to hold the peace. However, the Monroe Compromise instantly collapses because on his way back to Clinton County, Champ Ferguson and his supporters killed at least 4 men, like literally on their way back from the Monroe Compromise. So it didn't stick, and the raids start again. As we reach just a couple weeks later in April, as the chaos is starting to gear up again, Confederate Captain James McHenry is in Livingston, and he starts organizing a raid. He's going to go into Kentucky and raid the Union area. On their way to Albany, they join forces with Champ Ferguson, and on this raid, they kill a couple of guys, and they attempt to recoup some of Champ's property, which had been confiscated by Union supporters at the time. They stop by Jonathan Hale's mill. They steal a bunch of horses and mules. So meanwhile, at Cassandra and James's house, they're not really aware of what's going on. James Marion and a friend are there, and they dispatch his cousin, who is 16-year-old Fount Zachary, a son of the youngest brother, Peter Allen. And Fount is a home guard at this time. So he's operating as a picket, and they send him, they say, go up to Albany and tell our friends that things are cool in Fentress County, the rebels aren't coming. However, he crosses the state line and he gets around where Champ lives, and Champ's mother-in-law has a house that's pretty close by, and darkness falls, and he's still on his way to Albany, and he hears a group of people coming, he hears some soldiers coming, and thinks everything's cool. The rebels aren't around. So he steps out of a thicket. He's a home guard. He's got a gun strapped to his shoulder, and he encounters the raiders. He thinks that they're Unionists, so he shouts out, hey boys, you need not come this way. You're not gonna find them here. But unfortunately, they surround him, and Fount quickly realizes his mistake. He's surrounded by the enemy. One of the guerrillas demands that he surrender his weapon, and he readily turns it over. I'm talking about a 16-year-old boy here. So he's getting this powder pouch, and he's turning that over, and Champ Ferguson's with him, and he says, what's your name? And he says, Fount Zachary. Champ freaks out, immediately shoots the boy, knocks him down from his saddle onto the rocky ground. And Champ then jumps off of his horse and takes this 13-inch bowie knife, and even though he's already shot him, he takes the knife and stabs him in the throat and all the way down to his abdomen. and he stabs him with such pressure, others who were standing around heard the knife grate onto the ground, and they leave him. They just leave his body right in the middle of the road. And at some point, Fount's body is taken to Mrs. Owen's house, who's Champ's mother-in-law. They send word down to the Zachary house, and Easter, Samuel, and one of their friends go and see the body laid out there. And Fount is buried at the Zachary cemetery off of Billy Zachary Road. And he is the first of the Zachary family to die at the hands of Champ Ferguson. And the gruesome killing of such a young man sent shockwaves through the community. The stories picked up by local papers and inflamed sentiments even more. So Peter, his father, immediately vows revenge and sets off to pursue Ferguson, but he didn't find him. He did find another guy who had been present at the event, and he didn't wait to hear a word. He didn't wait to hear anything from this guy. Peter just immediately shot him through the heart. So the question is why? Why would a 40-year-old man kill a 16-year-old boy with such vehement rage? One reason for Champ's murderous activities stems from a widely cited story in which his wife Martha, and their 11-year-old daughter Anne were attacked and harassed by Union soldiers sometime around the beginning of the war. And there's multiple versions of this story with lots of conflicting details. But basically the gist is this: while Ferguson's not home, a group of 11 soldiers come to the house. They're drinking a lot of whiskey and getting rowdy, looking for Champ, probably trying to incite his wife to tell them where Champ is hiding out, and they won't do it. So they force the women to completely disrobe and cook a meal for them while they're nude. In some versions, the men brutally whip the women. They force them to parade around the house a few times, and then they also make them walk up and down the street while they're naked. In another version, which is obviously not true, the men kill both the wife and the daughter and burn the house down to conceal their dastardly crimes. So it's impossible to know exactly what happened. There's so many versions of this story, but it spreads like wildfire. And when Ferguson returns home, his wife and daughter tell him what happened, and they name names. They name the 11 men who did this to them, and Champ personally vows to kill each and every one of them, which, according to legend, he did. So my thoughts, and from what I've heard, I'm guessing that this group most likely included Elam Huddleston, some of the Zacharys, and Lieutenant Elza Smith, and maybe a few more. I've never seen a list of the 11 men, but just reading between the lines, that's my guess of who was involved. And that would also explain why when Champ Ferguson heard the name Zachary, he just went berserk and killed a 16-year-old boy who most likely was probably not there. A couple of accounts, they attribute the attack to Tinker Dave Beatty, but I don't think that's true. I think it's pretty unlikely, because even though they were on opposite sides, Champ seems to have respected Tinker Dave. He spoke of him without the vitriol that he saved when he talked about Elam Huddleston, Elza Smith, and Squire and Peter, because when those names were mentioned, Champ seemed to go berserk. In such an event, the harassment of his wife and his 11-year-old daughter certainly spawned a lot of gossip and created a lot of, and humiliated Mrs. Ferguson and his daughter. So this probably was a major factor in Champ's decision to move his family from Kentucky. He moved them down to the Sparta area in 1862. However, at the end of the war, he's being interviewed by a reporter. They asked him about this incident, and Champ Ferguson denied it ever happened. So there's a lot of conflicting information, even from Champ himself, as to whether or not this event really happened. And even though earlier I said that I wasn't going to judge, I will make an exception here, because this was not right. For all that can be said about Champ Ferguson, he was never accused of mistreating women or girls. So, it was an unfortunate accident, and it may have led to why he really hunted down Elon Huddleston and some of the Zacharys. So a month after he kills Fount, he comes back. He comes back to Squire and Cassandra's house. He's looking for Squire. He's stopped by a couple of times. He brandished a gun at William Logan, threatened to kill him. But during this time, men typically aren't staying at home because they don't want to endanger their families and they don't want to get ambushed. So they're hiding. They're hiding in the hills. However, if you remember, we had Cassandra's younger sister, Lucinda. She lives up north, south of Static, close to the state line. She's married Pearson Hildreth, and they're staunch Confederate supporters. Champ and his family, Champ and his raiders, they often stop at Pearson's and resupply. So, family lore has it that Lucinda tipped Champ off, and she says, "Hey, my brother-in-law's at home. I heard he's there today." So around 10 a.m. on this first or second day of June of 1862, 19 rebels rush up the lane to the Zachary farm, and Squire's surprised outside. Lafayette Allen and John Smith take the first shots at him, and Squire makes a break for it. He runs through the orchard into some woods, and Ferguson starts screaming, "Shoot him, damn him, shoot him!" And Ferguson shoots his pistol at Squire, but he misses. More shots, a volley of shots ring out, and Squire's hit. And evidently, these shots kill him because someone yells out, "Don't shoot a dead man," and advises the rebels to save their ammunition. So after they kill him, they leave his body in the woods, and they come back to the house. Champ comes to the door of the house, and Easter's sitting out on the porch with the dog. And Champ immediately points his gun towards the dog. Easter's 18 years old. She intervenes, she stands up to Champ, says, "Don't shoot the dog's not gonna bite you," and she takes the dog off the porch. So then Champ takes a look at Cassandra and takes a look at him and says, "We've killed your father." He tells Cassandra that he left Squire's body under a beech tree, and if she wants to bury him, she can, or she can let the buzzards have him. He didn't care. He then asks where the Squire's Colt Navy revolver was. Easter said, "Didn't my dad have it? He always has his gun with him when he leaves the house." So they ransack the house looking for the gun, but they can't find it. They go to the body, and they do manage to find the revolver and take it. And when they ransack the house, they take Squire's guns, they take some horse equipment, they take the family Bible, a watch, and an overcoat. So they're ransacking the house for a couple of hours. And meanwhile, Easter and Cassandra and a little boy named Brock go out and they recover Squire's body. Easter said that he had been shot in 3 places. He's been shot in the hand, he's been shot in the eye, and in the shoulder, and his brains have been shot out. They bring him back to the house, and they later bury him out in the family cemetery, which you can still go see north of Highway 111. And family lore says that Cassandra never spoke to her sister, Lucinda, again, and she blamed her in a large part in the death of her husband. So after the death of James, the family attempts to scrape by at the farm. We've got about 8 people. We've got Cassandra, she's 50 years old. She's got 2 adult daughters, Easter and Polly. There's a teenage boy, Samuel, he's 14, and we've got 4 younger kids, Pearson, Permelia, Lafayette, and Dillard. However, while they're trying to scrape by, the rebels aren't gonna leave them alone. They come back, and they set fire to the fences. They set fire to all of the outbuildings. Then they confiscated all the food and the perishable items. They empty out the house, they load up the wagons, and they take everything away. And at this time, Cassandra says, that's it, I've had enough, we're moving to Kentucky. So she takes the family and heads towards Columbia in Adair County. They travel at night and they hide during the day, sleeping to avoid detection. That's about 50 miles north. So meanwhile, things continue. Jackie, their eldest uncle, he's joined Company D. He's in the 32nd Kentucky Infantry. And later that fall, in September 1862, Union sympathizers in this area, they catch wind that Champ's gonna be passing through this area. So Jackie and some Union folks, they decide that they're gonna ambush Champ as he's crossing the Wolf River. They're waiting in the woods above Hale's mill to ambush him. And my understanding is that at some point, Jackie, who's about 5 foot tall, and he's an expert marksman, and he actually conceals himself under the water, hiding, while Champ is gonna pass by. So when he sees Champ, he comes out of the water, takes a shot at him, and it's supposed to be a sure shot. And the bullet actually hits Champ's saddle, but it ricochets off and kills Lafayette Allen instead. And this story catapulted Champ Ferguson's invincibility to mythic proportions. They say he couldn't be killed, and it'll take a silver bullet to take him down. So everybody is very upset that Lafayette Allen was murdered, because evidently he was a very well-liked young man. I think he was a school teacher around these parts. So in retaliation, after Lafayette is killed, they burn Hale's mill. They destroyed over $20,000 worth of property in 1862, which is a lot of money. It's a lot of stuff. And they start burning homes. They burn down Zachary's house, a lady named Widow Dixon, and a few other places. So the fall progresses, and around the 1st of January in 1863, military action continues. Confederate Captain Morgan is making his famed Christmas raid from Tennessee into Kentucky. He's already made a sweep into Kentucky, and he's coming back, and they park it around Burkesville. And Champ says, I hear that there's some really serious bushwhackers in the area. I'd like a couple of groups of people so I can go down and hunt down some bushwhackers. So he's got his old enemies in his sight. He's gonna go look for Elam Huddleston, who's building a house over around Glensport, Kentucky. He's moved from Clinton County up even farther and building a house for his family. His brother Moses and his cousin David are also, and their families are also staying there. And the Union troops, they've taken a leave. They're home around the holidays. So Champ's got a couple companies of men. There's a commanding officer from Morgan's cavalry with him. And the rebels reach Elam's house shortly before midnight and encircle the house. And they start setting fire to it. The house is still under construction. It's not finished. And Moses is on the ground floor, and he hears the commotion, and he wakes up, looks through the window, and he sees Champ Ferguson's face. And Champ screams, "Damn you, we've got you now." And they demand that the hosts surrender, but the men upstairs say, no, we're not surrendering. They grab their guns, they go upstairs of the unfinished house, leaving the families down below, and they start shooting at the Confederates from the second story. And over on the lower floor, the women and the children are dodging the bullets, and they're trying to put the fires out. So this gunfight goes on for about an hour. Elam gets shot, he falls to the ground floor, and he's not in good shape. The rebels have set a fire on the back door. The people in the house, they can't get it put out. And at this point, Moses and David give up. They surrender. And Champ tells them to come out of the house. They give up their guns, and they tell Ferguson that Elam's been shot. And he said he didn't care, go get him, bring him out anyway. So they go in, they pull Elam outside. Elam's still just clutching to life at this point, and his wife heads towards Elam, and then someone shot one of her fingers off, and then Champ shoots Elam dead in the yard. And the commanding officer from Morgan's cavalry reprimands Champ, saying that you can't behave this way. But Champ's got a grudge to settle. So the rebels plunder the house, they take Moses and David as prisoners, and a couple more of the empathetic soldiers move Elam's body back into the house, and they help the Huddlestons put the fire out. And Elam is buried at the Mill Springs battlefield. So Champ and his guerrillas, they take Moses and David Huddleston, they've got them as prisoners in tow, and they continue on, because Champ's not done. He goes on a pretty good murder spree this night, because it's a new year. They ransack a store for supplies, and they head to the house of Rufus Dowdy, who's a captain in Company C at this time, and he's living on Crocus Creek up in Adair County as well. So at this time, Captain Dowdy is not in the house, but Peter, Zachary, and Alan Zachary are. They had taken leave, and they're staying there while they're on their way back to the Company C. So the rebels arrive at the Dowdy house well past midnight, and they pound on the door, demanding for it to be open. And Mrs. Dowdy says, "Sure, just push it open, come on in." So they give it a shove, and they can't do it, and she says, "Just push harder." And they did. And Ferguson bursts in. He walks into a darkened house where he doesn't know who's inside, and he positions himself in between the fireplace and a bed. And in this bed, Peter Zachary has been sleeping. More of the rebels and the guerrillas filter into the house, and Champ demands to know who's in there. And someone else in the house said, "Well, who are you?" And this infuriates Champ. He says, "By God, that's not the question. Get up here." So Peter Zachary gets up. He gets up with his pistol, and he fires one shot at Ferguson inside the house. Mrs. Dowdy screams, "Don't shoot in the house." But that didn't work. A flurry of bullets ring out. Peter and Ferguson get into it. They start scuffling for Peter's gun, and they fall back onto the bed. And meanwhile, Alan Zachary, he gets up, and he makes it to the door somehow, and several shots are fired at him. And he falls forward onto the portico just as Champ and Peter are rising up from the bed. And Peter lunges towards the door to make an escape, but Champ's grabbed onto his shirt, and he's stabbing him repeatedly with that knife. And Ferguson said that later, he said after the war, Ferguson said that this was the most desperate struggle of his life. And after all of this, after the dust settles, Sarah Dowdy, who's the captain's daughter, she reported that Peter had been shot under the left ear, Alan had been shot in the chest, and the back part of his head had been just completely beaten in. They take Peter and bury him next to his son in the same cemetery off of Billy Zachary Road. But for some reason, they take Alan and inter him at Lebanon Cemetery. Excuse me. So at this point, he's gone. Oh, and then he's gone as well. Oh, and then all right. And so at this point, we've got left in the service, we've got James Marion, he's 23, and William Logan's about 16. These are the only sons that we've got left of James Allen Zachary who are in the military. Zachary is still around, and Philip Huddleston is there too. But after the death of his uncle and his brother, the commanding officers and the cavalry, they decide that they're gonna send William Logan home. You're too young, everybody around you was falling apart, so you need to go back. And that left James Marion in the service by himself for a while. But William Logan's not staying home. He quickly re-enters the service. So this is spring 1863, and a couple of months later, their uncle, Philip Huddleston, he becomes sick around February, and he was really sick. He's sick for like 2 months, languishing around, and the soldiers are getting more and more are wounded, and they have more and more serious injuries. They decide that they're gonna send Philip home to recuperate. You've been here for 2 months, you might as well go home and recuperate there. So as he's leaving and headed home, he dies of what they call an apoplectic fit, or a stroke. He dies on the road at Neatsville, endeavoring to reach his family. Thomas Huddleston is the husband of the older sister, Jane. He is not in the military, but he stayed home in Fentress County. At some point, sometime in 1863, I'm not sure when, some rebels come to his house and knock on the door, and when he goes to the door and answers it, they shoot him point blank and kill him too. So, they're gone. Meanwhile, actually, Jane and Easter are very instrumental in collecting information and feeding that to Jonathan Hale. They're part of his spy network as well. So now they're almost alone. William Logan at this time, he's re-enlisted, and they get down south in Knoxville in the fall, in October, and there is an engagement around Philadelphia, Tennessee, on October the 20th, and the Confederates completely rout the Federals. They take over 400 prisoners, and they capture William Logan Zachary as well. So he was taken to Belle Isle Prison, which is an island on the James River in Richmond, Virginia. They take him there in 1863. And if you know anything about Belle Isle, the conditions were notoriously bad. It's an island in the middle of the James River. They cram about 7,000 men into a 6-acre space. At some point, Captain Henry Wirtz was the overseer of Belle Isle, where he refined some pretty cruel methods of managing prisoners before he was transferred to oversee Andersonville Prison, and because of this, Wirtz was later tried and convicted and executed for war crimes. About 30,000 people died under his watch. Thousands of prisoners are living in the island with tents. There's no shelter from the elements. They're averaging about 10 men per tent. Overcrowded conditions and the lack of food are leading to mass starvation, like this prisoner here. Dozens of prisoners are dying every day, and they're burying them in mass graves. So William got captured on the 1st of November, and he essentially is starving to death, but he contracts pneumonia, and that finishes him off on March the 16th. He dies of pneumonia, and he was about 18 or 19 years old. So at this point, that's it. James Zachary is on his own. He's the only remaining Zachary from his immediate family left in the cavalry. He's lost his father, he's lost 4 brothers, 2 uncles, and countless cousins and friends. But he soldiers on. The First Kentucky Cavalry joins the Atlanta campaign in May of 1864, and he receives permanent damage to his throat from the smoke inhalation. And in my family, they say that I guess he had a really raspy voice. He was 5'9", 140 pounds, and just a raspy voice, and kind of talked into a whisper, but that's what my great uncle told me. Eventually, they return to Camp Nelson, Kentucky, and they stay there until they're mustered out on December the 31st, 1864. So, General Lee, in the spring of 1865, he surrenders to General Grant at Appomattox, and less than a week later, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. And I also missed that there's actually like one bright spot. So if I can go back, Easter Ann, she ends up getting married. She's about 18, 19, 20 at this time. She marries Moses Jackson. They get married and have a little girl. So that's the one bright spot during the war for them. So in May 1865, after Lincoln's assassinated, Champ Ferguson is arrested at his farm in Sparta after the war is over. They arrest him and take him to Nashville to be prosecuted for war crimes. And after the Civil War, only 3 people out of this whole war were prosecuted for war crimes. Champ Ferguson, Henry Wirtz, who I talked about, and a guy named Henry Magruder. The trial begins on July 11th, 1865, and it lasts for 2 months. And this is front page national news. Champ was charged for being a guerrilla and for 53 counts of murder, although Champ himself said he was probably responsible for killing over 100 men. The prosecution called 43 witnesses to testify against him, one of which was 21-year-old Easter Zachary. James Marion, he gets married at the end of September, so he doesn't go. Easter, she travels at least 130 miles to Nashville to testify at the trial of Champ Ferguson, and she relates the story of how her father died. At this point, she's got a 2-year-old daughter, and she's also in the early stages of pregnancy, so I think it's pretty remarkable that she made this trip to go testify at Nashville. They were going to call Cassander, but she didn't testify for some reason. And in October, after a very lengthy trial, Ferguson was found guilty and sentenced to death, and he was executed 10 days later. And thus ends the saga of the Civil War for the Zachary family. So this is James Marion Zachary as an adult. He was my second great-grandfather, and his son wrote a book and was a traveling minister who traveled all over the United States. And he wrote a little bit about the family history. And he said that the best thing that can be said of the ancestors of James M. Zachary is that they were quite peaceable, patriotic citizens and industrious farmers, seldom seeking literary honor or acquiring political fame. They were men of courage and daring bravery, true to a friend and dangerous to an enemy. Thus, a mixture of good and evil. About his dad, he said, James Marion Zachary is of a roaming disposition, and he is a quiet, peaceful, industrious citizen later in life, except when angry, and then, like all other Zacharys, he's a dangerous man. So Cassander, after the war, Cassander and the remaining children returned to the farm. They lost about 75% of their assets. The war decimated them. Polly gets married when she's 30. She marries a man named Milton Woodrum. And James Marion and Easter, they decide that they're going to move farther north. They're going up to Liberty, Kentucky. They buy 80 acres and split a farm. James and Melinda take half, and Easter and Moses take the other half. Samuel ends up growing up and moving to Indiana. Pearson, he inherits the Zachary farm. Cornelia, she gets married to the son of Rufus Dowdy, and they move to Illinois. Lafayette moves to Texas, and Dillard Goodpasture, he also moves to Illinois. And that's it. That's all I've got for you. That's the end of my story. And I will this is my contact information. If you guys know anything or know anyone who might have pictures, I would really love to replace these placeholders with actual pictures of my true family members. So if you have any more information, I would truly love to hear from you.
So Andrea, do you plan or think you will put this in a book someday, or?
Oh yeah, that's the goal. What'd I get wrong, Richard?
It's all good.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Did you guys have any questions or comments, Brett Smith?
I'm proud of you, Andrew, you done good.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, sir.
There was a guy in the First Kentucky Cavalry that, when they come down through Travisville at that skirmish, he was named Pleasant Jasper Zachary. How was he kin to the other Zacharys?
He is a descendant of Jackie Zachary, I think. Pleasant? Yeah, okay. Oh, right.
You're kin to Pleasant, Richard?
No, I'm akin to Jackie Zachary.
Okay.
Pleasant lives in Overton County. Lived in Overton County, and his descendants are down there. And Sullivan's at Rickman,
Yeah. Yeah, I thought he was from Rickman area.
and them,
But he served in the First Kentucky Cavalry.
Loopers.
I never knew how he was connected to these, the other Zacharys.
He was Jackie's boy.
Jackie being the one that killed Fade Allen down there, I know me.
Yes, so I'm, beg your pardon, I meant to color coordinate these. These are the guys that, Champ Ferguson killed. So he got them, and he kinda got William Logan too. I'm just kinda curious how many of you are related to the Zacharys, just by a show of hands. Wow, you're outnumbered, Brent.
Yeah.
Something that I read in the books, he was talking about him going into Champ's wife's house and parading goes down the street. His brother, James, was supposed to have been a part of that, and later on, he killed his brother.
No, Jim Zachary, he died early in the war, but he did not die in Champ.
He got killed up at, Camp Dick Robinson. He was killing citizens up there that he thought was Confederate sympathizers. And they clipped him, shot him in the guts with a shotgun, somebody did.
They had sworn that they were gonna kill each other. They said as soon as they saw each other, they were gonna kill each other, even though they were brothers.
Well, I didn't have the book, and I can see the author.
Okay. Yeah, there are lots of books on Champ Ferguson. And there's lots and lots of material on him. Finding stuff on the Zacharys has been more of a challenge.
Well, it talks about him going into the hospital where his brother was, and he kills him.
Oh, okay, so that's a rumor. So Lieutenant Elza Smith, he had been wounded at the Battle of Saltville, Virginia, towards the end of the year, and he got shot, and he was staying on the second story of an infirmary at Saltville. And somehow Champ Ferguson was there as part of it, and he heard that Elza Smith was, had been wounded and was staying in there. So he forced his way into the infirmary and shot and killed Elza Smith as he's lying in his hospital bed. And Champ Ferguson also killed a bunch of soldiers who were wounded on the battlefield. That was one of the murder charges against him. With Elza Smith, he was charged for murder. And one of the books, for some reason, erroneously says that Elza Smith was a pseudonym for Jim, and that's incorrect.
And there was a Hildreth, William Hildreth was with Champ, going back to the Hildreths. Lucinda's old man was a Hildreth, correct?
Yeah, Pearson.
So William Hildreth was with Champ when he executed Elza in the hospital. And we know for sure that William Hildreth was in the hospital with him, because he said, make sure you done good work. And when they left, they said, we killed the man that killed Hamilton, talking about O.P. Hamilton. He was quoted saying that.
Yeah, I know that there is a book, and that they said that they thought that Elza Smith was a pseudonym for his brother, but that's not true. Yes, sir.
Do you think, or anyone think that could Elza Smith be the reason that Champ Ferguson changed course and went to Saltville? Maybe he knew Elza was, he had him on his list of those 11, And he knew that Elza was at Saltville, so he went up there to fight at Saltville to try to find him. And then he eventually found him in the Fermi.
Well, Champ Ferguson, he kind of attached himself to official Confederate troop movements as it suited him. So he could have already been in the area, he could have been with Morgan's cavalry.
Well, Morgan was murdered by the Union in Knoxville.
Okay,
And Champ and them boys, they loved him. The women loved John Hunt Morgan. He was captured and taken to prison. When he done his Ohio and Indiana raid, he was captured and sent to Camp Chase. He come back, and he was having a big party and dancing and doing all kinds of stuff down in Knoxville. The Union men ambushed him and murdered him, and then they paraded his dead body on his horse. Champ and them was sent by Basil Duke, heading to North Carolina to go and try to stop Sherman on his raid to the sea. They got wind when they got over to North Carolina about John Hunt Morgan being murdered, whom they loved. And they said that fighting Joe Wheeler and Basil Duke won. Basil Duke was John Hunt Morgan's brother-in-law. He was married to John Hunt Morgan's sister. They said that all discipline that Champ and his boys had, when they got wind of what happened to John Hunt Morgan, they said it all went out the door. They said then they was uncontrollable, and they broke off from the rest of the army, went to Saltville. I truly believe that they know that Elvis Smith was there, or hoping that he was there, because he was the last man on the hit list.
oh, he was, well, cause I mean, Saltville is far. Okay, I didn't realize that. Oh.
Elza was the last man on the hit list of the people that wronged Champ's wife and daughter, and I think he was hunting for him, was searching for him.
Well, that makes me glad that James Marion was not one of the 11.
Well, Andrea, we thank you very, very much for your presentation, and thank all of you for coming. We'll probably have another meeting somewhere around February-ish, and then we may have the January trip to the archives. So be sure to sign up over there if you're interested in any of that. So thank you very much. Have some goodies before you leave, so we don't need to take them home with us. So, any questions or whatever? Okay, thank you very much. This may be on YouTube, right?
Oh, yeah, it'll be on